and this is Psych 516 Productive and Counterproductive Behaviors in the Workplace. I'm going to start by reading the question and then I will do my best to answer it the best I can. So, how have recent historical events, i.e., 2020 to present, affected the course of both research and practice in the field of industrial organizational psychology? Give several examples and their outcomes. All right, so I'm going to answer this in two different layers. Obviously, the research and the practice side, and the research actually gives birth to some very exciting things on the practice side. But getting there is, as they say, most of the fun. So let's start with COVID-19. There was a researcher by the name of Kurt Rudolph, and at the time he was at St. Louis University, and now he edits the field manual or the field journal, Industrial Organizational Psychology. So you could say that he's kind of got his thumb on the pulse of what's happening in research, and what he put forward was a paper, a descriptive paper, that talked about how COVID-19 was disrupting and changing industries. And he talked about things like occupational health, he talked about things like work and family conflict, job insecurity, uh, he talked about things like telecommuting, and there's some interesting things on the back of that here in a second. But what this paper did wasn't just describe how COVID was affecting things. It sort of set a standard and sort of spawned new research. It it garnered lots of responses throughout the years. People responding and how research and, of how COVID-19 was changing that aspect of work. Um, and on top of that, it changed the pace of research. So this is directly tied to COVID-19. The pace of research changed because you had institutions and organizations needing answers. And so researchers were increasing the cycle of their research and to get those answers. You could say that they were moving at a crisis speed with a lot of urgency to get to these answers. So moving on, remote work. Remote work was highly studied uh, and adopted. It was sort of forced onto many industries and organizations, profit and nonprofit, faith-based and secular. It was kind of just necessary. And there was one researcher by the name of Robbie, and he was at Florida International University. And really quick, he spent several years as a sales professional at top tier organizations, Procter Gamble, et cetera, et cetera. And he did this way before COVID-19, and and before his PhD. Then he started writing around 2017. He published a meta-analysis about telecommuting, telecommuting to work, so remote work, and it set a precedent. It kind of was the standard before COVID-19 about telecommuting. And after, here's where it ties in 2024, he updated it with hundreds of studies, obviously, because things had changed. The landscape of professional work had changed. And what he found, what he put forth, was something called the dual model, the dual pathway model, where it talks about how remote work increases autonomy, which is a good thing, but it also increases isolation, which is obviously a bad thing. And so what he was instructing these organizations to do was study and track isolation and autonomy in their employees. Now, this is the very exciting thing. This is how it changes the practice of organizational psychology. It begs the question, who is going to be investigating these metrics, right? Who is going to be asking, are our people drowning in isolation, or are they thriving with their autonomy? And of course, the answer is industrial organizational psychology. And here's where again it changed the practice. This became so important. This metric became so important that it birthed practically an entire industry called people analytics. So any Fortune 500, or sorry, any company with 500 employees or more started tracking this type of data, and it literally gave birth to a new um, industry. And in 2024, an entirely new professional society modeled after PSYOP, uh, Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology. So lots of exciting things. I could have mentioned things like AI and how that's changing things. Really fascinating stuff in that field as well. So if I had to summarize for this room, I'd say that COVID-19 forced the field to move quickly with research getting answers. I would say that it forced remote work to be studied in a different way and gave birth to an entirely new industry called people analytics. It built an entirely new operating model and in some ways an entirely new industry to keep up with the work pace that stopped standing still. Thank you.